Kent Hance, best storyteller in Texas, and today we have on the agenda one of the best persons I've ever known, one of my best friends, Senator Phil Gramm, lover, fighter, and wild horse rider. He can do it all. And his lovely wife, Wendy, we're going to get her on sometime. But, Senator, it's good to see you and good to have you on the program.
Well, listen, it's good to be seen, and it's good to be on the program. And you look all right for an old man. You're aging well.
Well, I feel good. I'm trying to age well. Phil and I had the opportunity to serve in Congress together, got elected together, and he carried Reagan's budget cuts. I carried the tax cuts. But I'll tell you, there wouldn't have been a Reagan economics if it hadn't been for Phil Gramm. He went out of his way to be the leader of the pack, and I was the second leader, but I was a distant second. And that Phil was well prepared. He's an economist, taught at A&M, and originally you grew up in Georgia, isn't that right?
Yeah, I was born at Fort Benning. My dad was there during the war.
And you were born in Fort Benning, 1942, isn't that correct?
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
What I wanted to interview you about today, you have a new book out, and it's called The Myth of American Inequality. And, you know, every few months or every few years, somebody writes some article that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And your book, which is really good, discredits that and points out that is not correct. And what brought you the idea to write this book?
Well, first of all, for about the last 20 years, it has seemed to me, and increasingly to a lot of other people who study economics and government data, that there's something wrong with government statistics. And just give you a couple of examples. In 1967, when the funding for the war on poverty ramped up, government was providing at federal, state, and local level through transfer payments about $9,700 for the average family in the bottom 20% of income earners in this country. By 2017, that number had grown to $45,400 for the average family in the bottom 20% of American earners. And yet the poverty rate was virtually unchanged. Now, how can you give people $45,400 a year and have the poverty rate unchanged? Another example of how it just didn't all add up was the Census Bureau comes out every year with what family income is, household income. And every year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics comes out with what households spend. Well, guess what? Last year, the bottom 20% of income earners in America spent twice what the Census Bureau said their income was. So what we found in finally going back and trying to put together, go behind the data, I think is the best way to say it, is that the Census Bureau, dating back to 1947, counts only about 1/3 of all transfer payments as income to people who got the transfers. It doesn't count.
So you're talking about welfare payments that if they're getting some type of welfare that the Census Bureau, about 2/3 of it, they don't report.
That's right. Yeah. They don't report Medicaid, food, where the government pays your health care bill, food stamps, where government gives you a debit card, rent subsidies, where the government pays your rent, and they don't take taxes into account. So they don't count refundable tax credits. And on the upper end of the income distribution, since they don't take taxes into account, they're comparing the gross income of high-income households to the income of lower-income households, where they're counting only a third of the government transfer payments. So let me just give you a couple of statistics to set it in perspective. The Census Bureau says the top 20% of earners in America earn 16.7 times as much as the bottom 20%. We show that if you count all transfer payments as income received by the people who got to transfer, and you count all taxes paid as income lost by the people that paid the taxes, that the ratio is not 16-1 between the top 20% and the bottom 20%, but only 4-1. We also show that the poverty rate is not 12%, but only between about 2 and 3%. And finally, in terms of this income inequality business, you've heard for the last 20 years that growing income inequality is one of the biggest problems in America. In the West, inequality is large and growing. Bernie Sanders says it's obscene and unsustainable. Well, we show if you count all transfer payments as income to people who got to transfer and all taxes paid as income lost to people who paid the taxes, that actually income inequality is lower today, slightly, but lower today than it was in 1947. So we're having this big debate about changing the economic system to deal with a problem that doesn't exist. Income inequality is not growing. Now, in the book, we do a lot of other things. We look at, do the rich pay their fair share? What does income mobility look like? 93% of the children that grow up in poverty families, in the bottom 20% of income families, do better than their parents. Mobility is alive and well in America. So obviously, if you could be born rich and brilliant and beautiful, do it. That's my advice. But every day, people that are plain, ordinary, and that don't have overwhelming ability succeed in America. The people are looking at two of us if they're looking at this on a screen. We came from humble backgrounds. We're sure as hell not beautiful. You can tell looking at us. And I would say, we worked hard, but I wouldn't say we were that smart. The point is, however, in America, it's easy to succeed if you work at it. And I think we're living proof, and millions of other people are.
No question about that. I think it's that all the time you look around and somebody's saying, and you mentioned Bernie Sanders, somebody's saying the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, that the capitalism is not working. The capitalism, if you look at the real poverty rate, it's not 20%, it's probably 3 or 4%, according to your book. And people, one thing you mentioned to me, people that are in poverty today live better than kings did 120 years ago, at the turn of the century.
You compare our lower income people to middle income people in Europe, and by all outward and visible signs of living space, nutrition, central heat and air, access to computer services, Americans live well. And look, there's no doubt about the fact there's some people that are really rich. Bill Gates is really rich. if that bothers you, it doesn't bother me because I didn't get poorer as he got richer. I got richer. In fact, we're using his products right here today. And it's also important to note that he only owns 7% of Microsoft. Who owns the other 93%? Our pension funds do. So he's really rich, but we're richer. So why does that bother somebody like Bernie Sanders? Doesn't bother me.
A lot of the things that happen with the socialists and people that are very, very liberal, they want to create a society of distrust and hate and of anyone that's done well. They want to appeal to the worst instincts that people have, and I'm like you. I'm glad that Gates or Warren Buffett or people have gotten rich and wealthy. I'm hoping the more money goes around, I'll get my share of it, and that I'm glad that people do well. And you take that, when they were trying to do away with tax credits on yachts, the people in Maine where they were building the yachts that were making good money building, they really got upset about it because it was going to hurt their product. And the socialists, the far left, they don't look at things like that. They don't look at the big picture. They just want to have envy and distrust.
Well, one thing I'll say for my mama is that there wasn't any envy in my mother. When we would ride past the nicest house in town, my mother would slow down and stick her finger out the window and say, if you work hard, you can have a house like that someday. Okay? And it's true. I never doubted it was true then, and we've proven it's true now. So again, I don't know to what extent this is just envy or to what extent it's really a path to power. Throughout history, the thing that has ended up destroying more governments, the thing that just completely destroys governments in South America. They make some progress, and then some Perón comes along and says, I'm going to take what they got away from them and give it to you. So you give me power and I'll do that. Well, what happens then is they destroy the system. They destroy wealth. They don't reallocate it. And so that's the debate we're having. But the point of the book is let's get our facts straight. Okay? Let's get our facts straight about what inequality is, what poverty is. And the plain truth in poverty, for all practical purposes, we have eliminated statistical poverty. The people that are poor today are people that have got a mental health problem or a drug problem, and they can't take care of themselves, and they can't take care of people that they're supposed to take care of. And our program, by simply providing more money, more food stamps, more housing subsidies, more refundable tax credit, doesn't reach those people. It simply gives money to people that aren't poor anymore. And we need to change the program to reach those people. Let me mention a couple of more findings of the book that are important. One is that as government transfers to bottom 20% earning households grew from 9,700 to 45,400, the percentage of prime work age adults in the bottom 20% of income earner households that actually worked fell from 68% to 36%. So we eliminated need, but we also did it at a cost of making people more and more dependent on the government. The second major finding of that nature is that the bottom 60% of people in America now have very similar incomes. That with all of the government transfers, people that are not breaking a sweat are about as well off as people who are working hard. Middle income Americans, households, 91% of the able-bodied adults work. And still, they're not much better off than low-income households in terms of earners, where only 36% of people work. So needless to say, I would argue there's a real inequity in that. And you'll remember when we were in Congress, we adopted a welfare reform bill that applied only to aid to families with dependent children, basically women with children that weren't married. We need to apply those work requirements to every means tested program.
Absolutely. You know, if there are jobs out there, I saw there were 7 million openings for jobs, and there's 11 million people collecting unemployment. So, I mean, that tells you something is bad wrong in society when it's just backwards like that. 11 million people, are needed, and 7 million don't have jobs. I mean, there are jobs there.
Well, look, have you been into a store or a restaurant where there's not a sign up saying help wanted?
Yeah, now hiring, help wanted.
Exactly. If you can't find a job now, you're not looking.
I think one of the problems we have is the envy, that they preach envy, that this guy, they're bad because they got money and you don't. Well, it's maybe because they worked harder and you didn't. And but I always felt like, when I'd see somebody at a big house, I think, well, someday I want to have a place like that, or someday I want to drive that kind of car. And that I never have been envious of anyone. I'm always been proud for them that they do well.
Well, I never doubted in my life. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. I never doubted in my life that there was any absence of opportunity. And I can say, and I've lived a long time, as you know, never in my life has somebody said there's something I couldn't do or couldn't be because of who my daddy was. I've found that if you've got some get up and go, or as my mama used to call it, you wanna do something. If you've got a lot of wanna, people will get out of the way. They'll help you up. But you got to have the wanna. Again, the whole purpose of the book is to try to get the facts straight. Because if we're going to have a debate, we need to know, the Bible says, ye shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free, but you got to know the truth. And the truth is that when you look at the amount of money that we're already providing needy people in America, it's as if Bernie Sanders went to bed, went to sleep, and dreamed that America was a welfare state and woke up and his dreams come true. We transfer more money than any other country in the world except France. So the plain truth is, when you count all the transfer payments and all the taxes, we're already a country that is basically taking 44% of all income in America is either being given to somebody or taken away from somebody in taxes. So there are a lot of things you need to maybe apologize about as a working American, but not taking care of people who, quote, have needs. And there are people that have needs. But again, when people are able-bodied, capable of working, I think they ought to work.
Absolutely. The as we look through your book, and it's excellent, You had a couple of people that helped you on it. Tell me a little about them.
Yeah. Well, let me show you the book, what it looks like. The Myth of American Inequality. You can order it on Amazon. Really big bookstores will have it, but the easiest things just put the Myth of American Inequality in and it'll go to Amazon. They got it for sale. And don't be put off by the numbers. It's an easy read. It's written with two people. One is an old colleague of mine. We taught together at Texas A&M. He's gone on and become a very famous economist. The other one was Assistant Commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And he spent a lifetime working on these numbers. And he knows these numbers better than anybody in the world. And so, again, in the book, we don't argue that we're providing too much or too little. We just argue we need to get the facts straight. And maybe if we got the facts straight, we could have a more reasonable debate. Maybe there would be a greater group of people who could come to the same mind about what we want to do in the country. Let's get the facts straight and then decide what our policy should be.
You know, you look at the book. I was thrilled when I saw it, simply because the facts have not been out there. People were taking for granted that the Bureau of Census was saying, well, the rich getting richer, poor getting poorer. And yet they did not count in the wealth or the amount of money of the poor, that they didn't count the food stamps, they didn't count subsidized housing, they didn't count Medicaid. And so you put all that in the average person poverty, they may be getting $50,000 value. And yet someone that's making well, doing well and making money, their income taxes come out 36, 38, maybe up to 40%. And if you live in California or New York, where you have to pay 17% above that, then all of a sudden you look and you're paying 57%, 50 to 57% of every penny you make. That does not encourage people, entrepreneurs and others, to go out and make more. It's a lot less. Ronald Reagan, as you know, was my hero and your hero, and he always tried to point that out, that he wanted to help the poor people to get out of poverty, not keep them in. And I think some of the people on the left, they want to keep them in so they'll be dependent on them. They want to keep it where they'll be dependent on their party.
Ronald Reagan wanted to help them help themselves so they could be our equal. And in fact, the book concludes with a quote from Ronald Reagan, and makes exactly that point, that equality comes from the ability to take care of yourself. It doesn't come from being taken care of. So that's basically the thrust of the book. I mean, we really look at a lot of all these things you're hearing about these rich people that aren't paying taxes. Let me just give you an example. You remember the stories that were out last year about ProPublica, this left-wing newsletter that had stolen tax data, and they were claiming that people like Gates and people like
Warren Buffett,
that they weren't paying any significant amount of taxes. Well, we went back and looked at that data in this book. And so what they did is, sure enough, apparently they had how much taxes they paid, but they didn't use how much income they earned to make the comparison. They made up an income figure by estimating what they owned and what their income would be had they sold everything they owned in that year and taken all the capital gains. Well, What would your income have been 2 years ago when the economy was really strong if you had had to cash out of your pension fund, if you'd had to sell your house? But the point is, that's not your income. And so that the whole argument was completely fraudulent. We have IRS data on billionaires. And then you listen to this debate, and it's as if, my God, if we could just make these billionaires pay taxes, that we could have all these wonderful things. Well, let me give you an unhappy truth. If you took every penny earned by every billionaire last year that the government didn't already take in taxes, you could hardly fund the government for a week. The plain truth is the people that pay most taxes in America are upper middle income earners. And why do they pay the most taxes? Because of the most of them. And this idea that government is going to tax these super rich, and that's going to take care of us, and we're going to have everything. We don't have to pay taxes. Don't believe it.
It's not true, and I think the old saying that a lot of the hard left makes about, well, rich getting richer and not paying tax, that is absurd. And people that are middle income that are making 120,000, both spouses are working, and they've got 3 kids in school, they're not considered rich. But the left wants to consider them to be rich because they want to transfer payment to people that make less. And that's just one of the things we find and we have to fight on a regular basis.
Well, remember the tax increase that occurred when Clinton first became president. They were only going to tax the rich, and it turned out that they raised the tax on Social Security for people that had incomes of over $25,000 a year. Now, there are a lot of definitions of rich, but $25,000 a year is not one of them. Again, as you know from all your work on the Ways and Means Committee, when people are talking about raising significant amounts of money, they're talking about middle income Americans paying more. And it's true because there's so many of us and there are not enough rich people.
There's really not. And the rich people, I always talk about this, they invest. Charles Barkley invested in franchise, Popeye's Chicken and other things. And one time his mother said something about he was going to vote for some Republican run for president. And she said, well, that's a Republican. He said, Mama, we're making enough money that we are Republicans. You just got to realize it. And I always thought that he's pretty funny anyway. And that, he didn't want people raising his taxes. I mean, he was creating jobs. He could understand it, and that was for creating jobs and creating more opportunities for other people. If people have the opportunity, they're going to take advantage of it. If they're convinced by government officials that they can't get ahead no matter what, have a tendency to give up and think, well, let the government do it. And, there is a problem in this day and time, especially when Biden came out with unemployment benefits. We had people in construction that all of a sudden they were making more money by staying home and not working. And I've got a construction business and that apartment construction business, and we lost people left and right. And one guy told me, I can make more by staying home, and why should I come work? And that when the government tells you they can give you everything, eventually they'll be able to take everything away. And that it's about power, and it's about trying to make sure that they have the power, regardless how they get it. And this book is really good. I hope people will get a copy of it and read, because once they do that, they'll see that the solutions are knowing exactly what to do. Your hand's a little over American. Put it back up there, Phil. Put the book back up. The Myth of American Inequality. It is a myth, and thank goodness y'all wrote a book, and it's got a lot of statistics in it. But look, if you go through that book, you're going to find 2 or 3 things that tell you that the rich not getting richer and the poor not getting poorer, and there are less people in poverty today
ever in the history of the world.
Yep, and for them to destroy capitalism over facts that are not correct is just wrong, and would suffer generations and generations of our children, grandchildren, great grandchildren would suffer immensely if they did away with capitalism and came up with socialism. One of the things I teach in my class, I'll show a picture of the Korean Peninsula at night.
Yeah.
And there's 1 or 2 lights on in North Korea, and South Korea is lit up like a Vegas. And I said, here you have a comparison of capitalism versus communist and totalitarian state. And I think of all the pictures I can show, that one picture says more about what we need to have as a capitalist society than anything else. You look at it and you shake your head and think, God almighty, what is going on? They don't have electricity in the North. In South it is wide open. People are working, they have jobs, and they have confidence. Phil, thank you very much for being on the program. I want to get you back sometime and talk about the Reagan budget cuts and tax cuts. And let's talk about that. And you can even tell the story about how I was so excited I locked my keys in the car at the White House.
Oh, I remember it well. You had parked right in front of the visitors' entry. And we'd gone to the meeting. We came out, and then Hance started acting strange, looking around, fumbling. And so I said, Hance, what is it? We need to leave. They got all these people coming. They're going to use this entrance. We parked right in front of it. So he said, I locked my keys in the car. And so we got the police come over. Hell, a guy came. They were used to people like Hance. And they he took a thing, jammed it down, car open. We drove off. I never rode back to the White House with Kent Hance.
Well, one thing, when, I came out and I said, let's get a ride with Stenholm. You said, what's wrong with your car? And I said, it won't start. He said, hell yeah, you didn't get in it. And that's when I confessed that I locked my keys in there. And I said, Gramm, whatever you do, don't tell anybody. Well, the next Sunday, there was a front page story in the Houston Chronicle, and it said not that he was excited, but he did lock his keys in the car. And it's pretty funny. We'll have some other stories like that. And I'm going to get Gramm back on sometime this spring, and we'll talk about the Reagan Revolution, which was great. It wouldn't have happened without Phil Gramm. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for all you've done for America.
Okay, talk to you later.